rights problems, to address the crony capitalism that exists, to address the kind of outrageous behavior that we see with great regularity from Vladimir Putin. And I'm happy to further yield to my friend.
Well, I agree with that. And any of these things that will help promote the development of a middle class in these other countries, whether it be China or Russia in this particular case, creates a new consumer class for American goods. Now, we're all patriotic. We want to buy American. I love to go to the store and I'll buy something and the label says Made in America and I feel good. I feel good about it. Most Americans do. But by God, I want a Russian mother to buy something on the shelf that says Made in America. We need to sell America, sell American goods overseas. That's where 95% of the world's consumers are. And our economy has been too much mired in domestic consumption at the expense of not looking into the outside world to export American-made goods to these consumers who live outside the United States. And by normalizing our trade relationship with Russia, we will create the mechanism to do that with Russia. This will increase critical sales of American goods and services to Russia, goods and services. And not only that, we will create very good, high-paying jobs here in the United States. This is definitely a win-win situation. Now, we spoke about Russia being the 9th largest world economy, importing more than $400 billion in goods and services. And as some of my colleagues may be aware, Louisiana, my state, it's a small state, but it's 7th among the 50 states in total exports because of our location on the Gulf of Mexico and our waterways and our ports. In the first quarter of 2012, Louisiana farmers and small businesses exported nearly $14.25 billion in goods and services to the rest of the world. And in fact, in 2011, Louisiana exported $135 million worth of goods to Russia, which created a lot of good jobs in Louisiana. Louisiana was a top supplier of PVC plastics to Russia in 2011 with $21.4 million in exports. But exporters in the EU and in China still accounted for more than 60% of Russian imports of that particular material. So we have an opportunity to grow this if we grant this kind of permanent normalized trade relationship.
Mr. Speaker, if I might reclaim my time just to underscore again, PVC is that material that's used like in sprinklers, and I see this PVC material. I've been very familiar with it for years. And so what my friend is saying is that there's an opportunity for exports to exceed the 24 million coming from Louisiana to Russia. But right now, we're seeing other parts of the world transcend that. And by virtue of the fact that they have access to that consumer market in Russia, it's denying the people of Louisiana from being able to see an increase in the level of exports of PVC material into Russia. I'm happy to further yield.
That's exactly right. Our Louisiana producers of PVC plastic are looking for opportunities to get into that market, and yet they're being superseded by countries in Europe and China. In fact, when Russia, when it joined the WTO, agreed to reduce its average tariffs on plastic products from 10% to 6.2%. So if we don't do this, we're going to be subject to higher tariffs, putting us at a major competitive disadvantage. And our foreign competitors will take advantage of this. And, again, we'll have the mechanisms in place if we do grant trade relations to have a dispute mechanism in place and to ensure that Russia keeps its commitments to our workers, our businesses back here at home. Now, there's no reason not to move forward with this. And I hope that we can see some action on this relatively soon, because as each day ticks by, we are losing competitiveness. And one last tidbit of information, Louisiana doesn't have large Fortune 500 companies. We have a couple, but we have a lot of small and mid-sized firms that are manufacturers. And we're a leader in manufacturing on the small scale in the energy sector with equipment and services that are vital to energy production, energy security globally. And these companies would love to get into the Russian market, to have the right protections of law so that they could sell their goods and services. This would lead to a lot of economic activity in Louisiana. It would help create good-paying jobs once again, help promote our energy sector and development and manufacturing in the energy sector, of which Louisiana and the United States, frankly, has been a leader. So Congress must continue to support these kinds of agreements to boost our economy here at home, to create job opportunities, good-paying job opportunities right here at home. That's why it's so important to move forward on this.
Well,
and I will yield back to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, let me express my appreciation for the very thoughtful remarks, the dedication that my friend has shown to his Louisiana constituents and the American people is really it's very, very respected in this institution, and I want him to know how much, Mr. Speaker, I do appreciate his understanding of what it's going to take to create more jobs in Louisiana for the people there who are struggling and working so hard. You know, the one issue that I wanted to mention, I've talked about it earlier, but I think is very important, and it's really what's led to people who are in opposition to this, and that is this question of human rights. And we have horror story after horror story. I have stood in this well and several times talked about the relationship that I developed with a man who is currently in prison in Russia. And this man's name is Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He was in the energy business, a company called Yukos Oil. He was one of the most successful and dedicated and hard-working Russians. He was one of the greatest philanthropists in Russia, giving huge sums of money to support many, many charitable causes. But, Mr. Speaker, he was guilty of one thing and one thing only. He was not a supporter of Vladimir Putin's. And he sat in my office in the Rules Committee right upstairs here, and having visited him in Moscow and then having him visit me here in the capital, he said that he was nervous and he was concerned that he was going to face some consequences for his opposition to Vladimir Putin. And today I'm embarrassed to say how I reacted. I laughed. And I said, the Soviet Union no longer exists. We have moved to a country that is independent, free, strong, vibrant, moving away from corruption. And you, Mr. Khodorkovsky, Mikhail I was calling him then, I said, you are in fact one of the most successful people in the country. There's no way that you would face that kind of threat. Well, Mr. Speaker, tragically, we saw Mikhail Khodorkovsky jailed for 7 years, and then we saw an extension, another 7-year extension of his sentence. And I will tell you that that is one of the reasons, because of the dedication that I have to the name of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who at this moment is suffering in a prison in Russia. It is for that reason that I want us to take every step that we can to ensure that we bring about the kind of reform and the change that is essential. What we've done in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, is we have dealt with a specific case where a man died. Sergei Magnitsky was relatively young, I mean he's looking younger, in his 30s, lawyer who raised questions and concerns about the behavior of Vladimir Putin's Russia. And for that, he was sentenced to prison. He was beaten, tortured, and left to die. And that has raised concern here in the United States and around the world. That kind of action is not acceptable, and we have to do everything that we can to ensure that those who are responsible are brought to justice and that it never, ever happens again. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that in this legislation we have the so-called Magnitsky Bill, which was reported unanimously out of our House Foreign Affairs Committee. This measure has passed the Senate. We need to see the melding of these. We need to see this put together and passed so that we can say that we're going to expand our American values, creating jobs in the United States by opening up this market, and at the same time saying we will ensure that whoever is responsible for this kind of outrageous behavior is brought to justice. We're seeing, obviously, horrendous human rights violations take place around the globe. Yesterday morning, I stood here to talk about our great ambassador, an amazing an amazing Foreign Service officer who represented the United States in Damascus and Jerusalem and other spots in the world in his dedicated career. And tragically, Chris Stevens was killed, as we all know. We are seeing a very, very dangerous world. And that's why it's important for us to stand up and take action. And that's exactly what this measure, calling for the U.S. to be at the table with Russia by granting PNTR, will do. And so, again, my friend has said it perfectly. And Mr. Paulson said it. Mr. Meeks said it. My colleague, I know, in his talking points that I submitted for the record, Mr. Moran would have said it. Kevin Brady, the chairman of the Trade Subcommittee, had to go to a meeting, but he very much wanted to be part of our presentation this evening, and he passionately believes that this is the way for us to most effectively deal with the very, very serious problems that we have on economic growth and on human rights violations. And so I hope that we will be able to see passage as soon as possible. And again, I know that this is the time of year, as I said at the very outset, just weeks before the election, to be very partisan. But this is something that we can have a bipartisan victory on. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to implore President Obama to get engaged on this. I know that there are many issues. Again, looking at North Africa and the Middle East, I know he's campaigning in his quest to be reelected. But this is something that Democrats and Republicans in the House will pass with strong support if he will get engaged and work with us to ensure that we can bring this together. And so I hope very much that he will do that in the coming days and weeks to underscore his goal of creating jobs. And I'd like to further yield to my friend. Looks like he'd like to offer some
comments. Well, I thank the Chairman for yielding some time back to me. I share his sentiments about the situation with human rights and liberty. America has always been the beacon of liberty, individual liberty, and it's also been the hope of the world with regard to human rights. And we have to understand, the American public has to understand that one of the most important tools that we have as a nation is our economic strength, and it comes from each and every one of us in this country, from a plumber to a mechanic or someone engaged in small manufacturing, our farmers. That economic strength comes from each and every one of us. It wells up into the mighty country that we have. Now, we think about American might in terms of military might, and yes, it's a great and wondrous thing, but our economic strength is even more important. And the way we use that to influence events in the world, to help promote liberty, to promote human rights, is to engage in trade. And the surest way that we are going to help promote changes in Russia for the better is to help that middle class. And by engaging in trade, that middle class will be stronger, it will be wealthier, it will want to engage, and this will lead to serious political reforms. The last thing I want to say to the esteemed chairman is this. I share your sentiments with regard to Ambassador Stevens. He was a wonderful man. He served this country in many hot spots, difficult places. He was fearless. And I would also say that we oftentimes talk about our military men and women, and we put them up on the pedestal where we should rightly do so. But we forget to talk about our diplomats, our foreign service, who do the same sorts of things, putting themselves in harm's way in some of these very tough places around the world. They are extremely patriotic. They do their duty. They make us all proud. We lost a great patriot with Ambassador Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my friend for his very thoughtful contribution on that. And as we talk about human rights violations and the kind of threat that exists to those lovers of freedom around the world, I will say that just a couple of hours ago, I talked to a friend of mine who is Libyan. In fact, his father was the lead opposition for 4 decades to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And he was in tears in our conversation, saying that the people of Libya owe everything to the United States of America. He said Benghazi would have been completely lost were it not for the United States of America and what it is that we did to bring about the kind of liberation that they so desperately needed, having been repressed for 42 years under Muammar Gaddafi. And he went on to say that as we look at Libya, it's important to note that the tragic murder of Ambassador Stevens did not come from the people of Libya. It came from individuals, a few individuals. He said the people of Libya love the American people and revere the American people. You know, I suspect that as we're talking about Russian PNTR, that the same thing exists in Russia, because they're living with great oppression. They're living with what is little more than an authoritarian dictatorship, with the kind of crony capitalism and the violations of human rights that we're seeing. But, Mr. Speaker, the people of Russia, and I know many Russians, we all do, they have great respect and love for us as well. And so, again, our goal is to bring to an end repressive policies and use, as my friend so eloquently said, the economic strength of the United States that is exemplified in every American who is working in whatever capacity at all to see our economy grow, because we're the only complete superpower left in the world today, the only complete superpower. By virtue of that, I mean militarily, economically, and geopolitically. And we have to step up to the plate and continue to exercise that strong leadership role. And passage of permanent normal trade relations, taking this step, will go a long way towards doing just that. Mr. Speaker, I thank all of my friends who participated, and I know, as I've said, asked for general leave. Others who wanted to be here this evening and are unable to are going to be joining in submitting statements for the record. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, is now recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 60 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I will play the time. I need a little time to set up.
House will stand at ease. Do you need...
Mr. Speaker, my name is Keith Ellison. I'm the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus. And tonight I come before the people on the floor of the House of Representatives to discuss important issues facing our economy and the huge challenges that our nation is facing, particularly with regard to the events that are going to take shape right after the election. The Progressive Caucus has come together, Mr. Speaker, and thought very carefully about what a deal would look like and should look like. I want to talk about that tonight. I want to go into what we call the deal for all and to elaborate on some of the complexities that are facing our country and how this is a time when we really need to focus on the real core of what's important to make sure that as all these fiscal matters come together, that the United States and the people of America, particularly the working people, come out on top and in the right space. Before I dive into that, Mr. Speaker, I do want to yield just for a moment to talk about the great service of Ambassador Chris Stevens. Ambassador Stevens was a dedicated public servant, and he and the individuals who lost their lives in Benghazi recently have to be remembered for the dedicated service that they lended to our country. It's important also to note that that Chris Stevens loved Libya, loved Libyans, and it's not any accident that Libyans took to the streets not to attack America, but really Libyans came to the streets to holding up placards apologizing for the act of these terrorists who killed Americans and Libyans when they assaulted the consulate in Benghazi. And many of them held up placards extolling the great virtues of Chris Stevens. And it's important to point out that as Americans are watching these things unfold across the Middle East, that the last thing Chris Stevens would want would be for us to withdraw or pull out of Libya. It was this horrible incident that occurred in Benghazi was not done by the Libyan people. It was done by terrorists who have nothing but contempt for the democracy in Libya, which is unfolding, and that is why they would take their action against the consulate as they did do. But it's important to note that there was about 7 Libyans who died. The numbers are yet coming in, and of course, you know, they're subject to being revised. But there were a number of Libyans who lost their lives trying to defend that consulate, and I think that Americans should keep that in mind. Also, should keep in mind that as the outbreak of these protests across the Middle East, you have one Yemen, you have them in Libya, you have in Egypt. It is important to point out that leaders of these countries have apologized for these things, particularly Yemen, Libya, and then Egypt eventually got there. And it's important to point out that Americans should know that this is not representative of certainly the will of the Libyan people, and there are a lot of people across the region who support the United States and support a good relationship with the United States. We should not allow ourselves to be confused by these events. I could easily see how people could be, but when you see dedicated public servants risking their lives to build bridges, the last thing we want to do is withdraw and abandon these relationships that have been fought hard and now have been paid for in the blood of our heroes, Ambassador Chris Stevens being one of them. So I do want to just wrap up this section of my discussion tonight and just point out Chris Stevens, dedicated servant of the United States, dedicated, committed man who has gone and offered the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of his country to build bridges between people, and particularly to help build democracy in a weak state of Libya, a state that threw off a dictator. Chris Stevens went there to help the people and to help them build a democracy, and he must ever be remembered for his great sacrifice, and also that of the individuals who lost their lives with him, 4 Americans and several Libyans. And as the names come forward and as their names are released, we'll come back to this microphone and share the information with the people. So now, let's talk about the business we're here to talk about, Mr. Speaker. Tonight we're talking about the Progressive Caucus message. The Congressional Progressive Caucus is the organization in Congress dedicated to talking about what's good for the average working American, making sure that the average American's interest is looked out and regarded highly as we move forward. I want to talk a little bit about the budget for all, and not only the budget for all, but also the deal for all. I want to just get right to the point and point out, Mr. Speaker, that in this deal for all, that the Progressive Caucus is proposing, we're clear that there are a few things. Everybody's talking about the fiscal cliff. The sequestration cuts are going to come into effect. These are significant cuts both in military and non-military domestic discretionary spending, which will be devastating to important programs like transportation, like health care, like research, like education. They'll put significant cuts in these important programs, laying off a lot of people, perhaps even exacerbating our already too high unemployment rate. But not only that, we see that the Bush tax cuts will expire, the payroll tax will expire, the so-called doc fix will expire, AMT will expire. There's a number of things coming together, and many people who watch the news know that after this election, we're going to see a significant amount of activity around how we, members of Congress, will be able to pull our fiscal situation back together in a way that hopefully avoids big cuts to important programs hopefully avoids great pain that working class people might suffer if we don't come together and come up with some deal. And you've heard a lot of discussion about a grand bargain. But if we do any deal, the core values of the deal, we need to state first up and up front what this deal must include. The first thing this deal must include, and I'll start with this poster here, Mr. Speaker, is protection for America's social safety net. Let me start with a quote from President Roosevelt, where he says, "Every man, woman, and child is a partner." And in 2012, these words come to life when we see that more than 58 million people rely on Medicaid. That's a lot of people, Mr. Speaker. 48 million rely on Medicare. More than 61 million rely on Social Security. So, with the idea in mind that everybody is included, everybody counts, everybody is contemplated in our American life, it's important to point out that as we move forward with this deal for all or any deal that we might have, that it's important to maintain the social safety net, particularly in very difficult economic times. If you slice Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, you are going to literally be harming the interest in millions and millions of Americans. Therefore, key feature of any deal will be preservation of benefits for the people who need the most: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Mr. Speaker, the next slide, the next poster here, is a poster that talks about how we need to move our nation's military towards the ability to deal with 21st century threats. That will mean that we need to do some changes, some adjustments, and Cold War era weapon systems are just not what this particular moment calls for. So the second feature of the deal for all will be that the military, which has seen its budget literally double since 2001, will have to share and do some paring down, but not just paring down, literally advancing. But some of these old Cold War weapon era systems and some of these things that are fit for dealing with the Soviet Union just aren't necessary anymore. They're expensive, cost a lot of money, and they don't help us meet the threats we're facing right now. So the second feature of the deal for all would be moving our military to a position where it's dealing with 21st century threats, not simply maintaining old expensive programs that we don't really need. The third feature of the deal for all would be that we would ask Americans who've been well-to-do Americans, people who have benefited tremendously under the Bush tax cuts, to do a little more. Now, I know my friends in the Republican caucus and some conservatives often say that taxes, why would you want to punish somebody for being successful? Well, we think that America has done so much for so many that to help pay a little bit more to this country that you love is not a punishment. In fact, it's actually something that we would expect people to do. And there's a lot of very well-to-do people who agree with that point of view. We actually have a piece of an idea called the Buffett rule, because a very rich man says that, hey, a rich man like Warren Buffett should not be paying a lower tax rate than his secretary, which he does. And so Americans of various economic classes agree taxes are not a punishment. They are the cost and of funding a civilized society. And if we're going to meet the budget challenges facing our nation, we're going to have to get some revenue, and it might well come from the people who have benefited so much under the Bush-era tax cuts. And then, finally, but perhaps most importantly, Mr. Speaker, most importantly, we need to get Americans to work. This is a key feature of what any deal for all must include. So tonight we're talking about the deal for all, and we're talking about the fiscal cliff, and we're talking about what any fair agreement would have to include. And this is not bargaining chips, Mr. Speaker. All four of these things are key in order to have a safe, sound budget fix or grand bargain. We're going to have something to get Americans back to work, and we're talking about a infrastructure bank, a longer-term transportation bill, various things that I'm going to talk about tonight. But putting Americans back to work, asking the military to share in the cuts, and to revamp our military for a 21st century role. 3, asking the top 2% to pay a little bit more by allowing the Bush-era tax cuts to expire for the top echelon. It would only mean that their top rates would go from 35 to 39.5%. And then finally, we're going to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because these programs are essential and vital, particularly in times where people are truly having tough economic times. And so that's where we start. The conversation tonight focused on dealing with a proper resolution to these huge budget fights that we are about to have, because so many important features of our fiscal reality are coming to expiration on December 31st. So I want to say that we have this deal that I think that we should work on, Mr. Speaker, and this budget for all, this deal for all as well. It's something that I think we can reach, we should reach. The American people need us to try to work toward a solution. This is why the Progressive Caucus has come together and said this is what we should do. We should have a deal. The deal would be comprehensive, a deal that could help us avoid the harsh realities of sequestration, that could avoid the complete expiration of all the Bush tax cuts or the extension of all the Bush tax cuts, a deal that would help us do the doc fix and do all the things we need to do. We do need some kind of agreement, but the agreement has to have some key benchmarks. I've laid them out to you, and I'll just repeat. Ask the richest to help pay the freight for America. Ask the military to share in the cuts, good, safe, sound cuts that'll help position us for the 21st century are available. We need to make sure that we protect those who benefit from Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And most importantly, we need to grow the economy by investing in jobs. But we have had some difficulty getting together. And I'm not surprised. Colleagues on the other side of the aisle, on the Republican side of the aisle, have been, Mr. Speaker, slow to try to come together and work out the deals that we need. But we do extend our hand, hopefully, be able to come together and work out these problems, because the American people depend upon us to do that. But I do want to say that we have seen some real challenges over the course of the year, just in terms of getting things done. And so I think this is the time when we really need to come together and focus on what's needed. But in order to be fair, Mr. Speaker, I think the people should know what some of the real serious challenges that we've been facing are. And I just want to make note right now that we have had a Congress where obstruction has been the norm. It doesn't have to stay that way, and I urge colleagues on all sides of the aisle to work together. But I'll never forget being in this chamber just about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, when, because of obstructionism, we could not come together and ended up, the Republican caucus refused to vote to raise the debt ceiling, something that had been done literally dozens of times, both under Democrats and Republicans, but they refused to do it. And and this political rancor resulted in the downgrade of America's bond rating. This is a tragic moment that happened a year ago, but it marks the obstruction that we've seen. Hopefully this kind of obstruction will not be what we see going forward. But I think it's important that much of the obstruction that we began to see had to do with the budgetary position that we saw starting from the Congress from the very beginning. And the bottom line is that we started with the idea that we could only have massive cuts and no revenue. Massive cuts and no revenue. Our colleagues even continue to this day to talk about how terrible the economy continues to be, but their only prescription for fixing it is to take, as President Obama said, 2 tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and call us in the morning. That's funny, but it's sadly true as well. Tax cuts seems to be their only prescription for all problems facing the American economy. And we started out this Congress with the budget being laid out. It was talked about as the Ryan budget, but really was a Republican budget. He may have been the author of it, but they all voted for it, embraced it. But this budget, where we started out massive cuts, didn't balance for a long, long time, the budget never really added up, and it still doesn't. And so in order to get to a deal or some kind of grand bargain to deal with our fiscal challenges that are coming right up soon, we need a new spirit of cooperation, and it cannot be based on the budget that was offered by Paul Ryan and backed by the Republican Congress. Like I said, it didn't add up. The fact is that businesses, my Republican friends think that businesses always want a tax cut. I owned a small business myself. I was a lawyer. I had a law firm. I had staff that I had to pay. I had machines I had to purchase. I had rent that I had to pay. I had a payroll I had to make. And what I needed is clients coming through the door. So that would justify me adding and hiring more people. But just tax cuts alone was not what small business people need. What they really need is greater demand, which is what we're not addressing if we don't deal with the key feature in the deal for all, which is to invest in jobs. If people can't buy, Mr. Speaker, then stores can't sell, and if stores can't sell, they can't hire. And if they can't hire, people can't buy. And this is the heart of the problem. Slack demand, high unemployment, people who do have jobs nervous about making purchases, and this is the heart of the problem and what we've got to address. Misunderstanding these simple ideas about the importance of the American consumer having enough wherewithal to buy things that they need is really part of the heart of this problem that we're in right now. This idea of thinking that, oh yeah, just a tax cut will solve the problem, or, oh yeah, and get rid of all the health and safety regulations too. These two things can never bring America prosperity, but making sure that Americans are working and optimistic about their economic future will absolutely help this economy, and it's what we've got to do. And I think through the deal for all, any bargain we come to will put us on the right footing as long as we keep those key features in place. So here's the thing. We've got to get to the point where we're working together, and the key to that is to scrap this budget, this Ryan budget, and the Republicans have adopted. We've got to scrap that idea that we can't raise any taxes, that raising the taxes are bad, that taxes are wrong, and that taxes are always a problem, and that they're a punishment. We've got to scrap that idea. We know better than that. And so many of our colleagues even signed pledges that they wouldn't raise taxes. And this, of course, has been a problem. The only pledge I say around here is the Pledge of Allegiance. But the fact is that we've got to scrap this idea so that when we face this real serious fiscal cliff, some people are calling, that we are able to negotiate. And this means letting go of some of our long-held attachments, starting with the so-called Ryan Republican budget and these pledges, these no-tax pledges. If we were able to do that, we could solve our problems. And again, it's not all tax raising. There's going to be cuts too. We have some ideas about where we can cut in a way that makes our country stronger. But they will have to be a mixture of both of these things. And so I just want to talk a little bit about, the Ryan budget and talk about the Ryan Republican budget. And just to help dramatize what some of the key problems there are with it and why it's not workable and why we need to reject it as we move into this fiscal, this time when we're going to have to deal with this fiscal cliff as it's been named. One of the key features of why it's not going to work and why it's wrong is that it ends the Medicare guarantee. It replaces it with vouchers. Some people around here like to talk about Obamacare. Well, I far prefer Obamacare to voucher care, and it makes it dangerously more expensive for seniors and the disabled. We don't want to put seniors in a more precarious financial situation, which is what the Ryan voucher care idea would do. The Ryan budget, adopted by the Republicans, would also cut Medicaid funding by 34%. It cuts away tens of millions of needy people and turns the program into an underfunded block grant program. This is a sad way to treat some of our most vulnerable citizens. And you should know, Mr. Speaker, that Medicaid actually impacts seniors too, because so much of the money that funds nursing home care is for Medicaid. So it's not just Medicare. Medicaid cuts, 34%, would be very harmful. The Ryan budget also cuts transportation by 25%. Now, transportation is a job creator. Transportation puts Americans to work, building roads, bridges, transit, helping people get from here and there. I can imagine high-speed rail cars. I'm from Minnesota. I'd love to see us have a high-speed train from Duluth to Minneapolis to Chicago. It would be a great thing. It would put lots of people back to work, and it would improve productivity. It would allow people, after it's built, to get from here to there faster so they can get to meetings, so they can do what they need to do and stop the bottleneck, cut down on carbon emissions, and move people around, not just cars. Transportation, a huge job creator, cut 25% in the Ryan budget. Cuts education by 40%, 45%. Now, if there's one engine of economic development, having smarter, better trained people has got to be the core of that. And yet, education is cut by 45% in the Ryan budget. So, you know, the bottom line is these are some of the key things that are wrong with this budget. There are many more. I plan on talking about them. But I want to say, you know, just return to my theme a little bit, Mr. Speaker, and to say that we are facing a fiscal cliff. Americans do need to focus on it and do need to call their members of Congress and say, focus on the job at hand. We need you to focus your attention. We do know all these things are expiring. What are you people in Congress going to do about it? What we're saying we got to do about it in the Progressive Caucus is that we do need to come together and have a deal. But the deal has to have 4 pieces. And I'll repeat, Mr. Speaker, we need to make sure the military shares in the cuts by being more efficient. We need to make sure that we protect Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And we need to make sure that we are having that we're putting jobs up front and investing in American jobs to a very large degree. And we need to ask the wealthiest among us to contribute a little bit more so we can meet our budgetary challenges. That's what the Progressive Caucus says we need to do. We've had difficulty coming together because, well, quite frankly, obstruction. Republican obstruction has made it difficult to move forward and do anything. Why did we have the obstruction? Because we started out with signing pledges that we won't raise taxes, and we had a Ryan budget that imposed significant and deep cuts that have already resulted in a number of public sector workers being laid off and federal employees having a reduction in their health care. And so these things, this sort of obstructive nature and insisting on cuts only has been the source of the problem. In order to get to a solution, we need people to come off these rigid positions so that we can do them people's business. I mean, just to sort of like think about the level of obstruction. I already mentioned, Mr. Speaker, last August how dramatic it was when the Republican majority refused to raise the debt ceiling and caused us to have a downgrade in our bond rating. That was a sad moment. But we've also wasted a lot of time. For example, we've voted 32 times to repeal Obamacare. And I do call it Obamacare because Obama does care, which is more than I can say for some. But we had time for cutting or voting to repeal Obamacare 32 times, but we didn't have any time to offer serious fixes to the economy. And I just want to mention that that President Obama, to his credit, has done, I think, great and excellent work in offering solutions. They simply, Mr. Speaker, have been ignored. I mean, it's really kind of sad when you think about the fact that the President has offered real serious and important solutions to the problems of the nation, and yet they really have not been seriously addressed. For example, the President called us all here and talked about the American Jobs Act. This is a great piece of legislation. But do you know, Mr. Speaker, we've never even had a vote on it. We never even had an opportunity to say who wants the American Jobs Act. It was simply something that the Republican majority in the House wouldn't even address. The fact is that there were great ideas in this bill, and I just want to talk a little bit about those ideas because I think that they would really do a lot of good. It includes a national infrastructure bank bill, a proposal that we would be able to fund by the federal government putting some seed money in and then leveraging that money, that public money, with some private sector bonds. We would then have a fund of money that we could then use to make investment in important infrastructure that would be a key and important element of the program. We would be able to make investments in the transmission lines that would help take wind energy from the western part of my state in Minnesota and bring it to where the population centers are. We would be able to improve our grid and have a smart grid that would make energy use much more efficient and much more effective. And we would be able to use this infrastructure bank bill to be able to fund programs all over the United States where we wouldn't only improve, we wouldn't only build things that we need, but we would improve them. The American Society of Civil Engineers has addressed this issue, Mr. Speaker. What he said is about $2.3 trillion of infrastructure maintenance needs to be done. You know, I come from the city of Minneapolis, and in my city, about 5 years ago, we had a bridge fall into the Mississippi River. Maintenance in this country is critical. We have bridges that are old and deteriorating all over this country. We have bridges that are need of repair, roads as well, and we also have other projects that need to be taken care of in terms of our grid, in terms of wastewater treatment, in terms of all types of important infrastructure tools. But we are not investing in there. In fact, we're relying on the things that our grandparents gave us. We're relying on Eisenhower-era infrastructure because we haven't, in our age, focused on the needs of the American people to have infrastructure built. You know, just to talk a little bit more about the American Jobs Act, it would also extend cutting payroll taxes in half for 98% of businesses. It would also offer a complete payroll tax holiday for added workers or increased wages. It would extend 100% expensing into throughout this year, and if we were to pass it, maybe even longer. And this continues to be an effective way to incentivize new investment. And also, it would address and reform regulatory reductions to help entrepreneurs and small businesses access capital. We do need to help small business people be able to get the money they need to do investment in their company. And that means access to capital. Also, the American Jobs Act would also would have a returning heroes hiring tax credit for veterans. This is something we addressed already, which is a great thing, but it would move on from there and it would prevent up to 280,000 teacher layoffs. We have had, Mr. Speaker, you should know, we have had now about 30 months of private sector job growth, but we have had also significant number of months of public sector layoffs, mostly teachers. This is because of these draconian cuts that the federal government has made and state governments have been affected by, and therefore city and local governments. But we would be able to address these massive public sector workers layoffs, which is really hurting our economy, and of course teachers have been some of the most negatively impacted of all. We also would move from that idea to another great one, modernizing at least 35,000 public schools across the country. You know, our public schools across this nation, our kids go there, they spend hours and hours a day trying to learn there, but many of them are in very bad repair. 35,000 public schools need help in supporting we can support new science labs, internet-ready classrooms, and renovations to schools across the country in rural and urban America. The American Jobs Act, with all these great ideas, never got a shot in this Congress. It would, as I said, call for infrastructure investment with a national infrastructure bank, which I've talked about already, but I didn't mention airport improvements. I did mention waterways, but it would put literally thousands of workers back on the job. And also, we need to wire up this country. We would expand access to high-speed wireless as part of a plan for freeing up the nation's spectrum. Now, I want to just remind you, Mr. Speaker, that our nation at one time didn't have the entire country on the electrical grid. I mean, there was a program called Rural Electrification, which was a program under the Roosevelt administration, where our nation just decided that you would not have to leave the countryside, the rural areas, to come take advantage of electric lights, but we would wire the whole country, and we did. The new wiring, the new rural electrification program is connecting all of America with high-speed wireless. And this is a project we should embark on. And it's worthy. And it would help improve economic activity, and it would help revitalize rural communities. People wouldn't have to move to the urban centers for work, and it would be a great thing. The American Jobs Act also included pathways back to work for Americans looking for work. Of course, we have a serious unemployment problem, and we see some of our friends on the Republican side of the aisle shaking their finger and criticizing about, well, where are the jobs? I remember Speaker Boehner say, where are the jobs? And often when I hear that from my colleagues, I think to myself, well, the jobs are in the American Jobs Act. Can we take it up? Can we have a vote on it? Here's something we could do for Americans looking for work. One of the most innovative reforms to the unemployment insurance program in 40 years is a program, that says that as part of an extension of the unemployment insurance to prevent 5 million Americans looking for work from losing their benefits, the President's plan would include innovative work-based reforms to prevent layoffs and give states greater flexibility to use unemployment insurance benefits to fund and support job seekers, including things like work sharing, unemployment insurance for workers whose employers chose work sharing over layoffs. 2, a new Bridge to Work program. The plan builds on and improves innovative state programs where those displaced workers take temporary, voluntary work and pursue on-the-job training. 3, innovative entrepreneurship and wage insurance programs. States could also be empowered to implement wage insurance to help reemploy older workers and programs that make it easier for the unemployed workers to start their own businesses. So these are a number of things contained in the American Jobs Act which we have never had a shot at. And it's a key feature of what we propose in the Deal for All. Get to work. We've got a country to rebuild. Absolutely the case. But if the Republican majority would allow us to take up the American Jobs Act, I'm confident there's something in there that my colleagues will like. Maybe they'd like the $4,000 tax credit to employers for hiring long-term unemployed workers. That would be a great benefit to workers and employers. Maybe they might like another feature of the American Jobs Act, prohibiting employers from discriminating against unemployed workers when hiring. We know now that many workers who've been out of work and out of the market for a while are asked, do you have a job now? Have you been unemployed? And if the answer is yes for a certain amount of time, it's like, well, we're not going to hire you. It's simply prolonging the problem. But these are valuable workers with good skills, and they should have a shot to get back in the workforce. We also, we might also find support for expanding job opportunities for low-income youth and adults through a fund for successful approaches for subsidized employment, innovative training programs, and summer and year-round jobs for youth. One of the groups of people, Mr. Speaker, who's been hard hit, really hard hit during this recession is young people. And the American Jobs Act, proposed by President Obama, addresses youth employment. Yet we haven't had a chance to deal with it because of a Republican obstructionism. And I want to encourage all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to let go of your attachments. Let go of the pledges. Let go of the Ryan budget. Let's come together to solve our problems. Many of them can be found in the American Jobs Act. And, you know, for example, there's a whole section in there, Mr. Speaker, on the tax relief for every American worker and family. Now, I don't think we need to extend tax cuts for the richest folks because they don't need them. But when people do need them, Democrats are happy to cut taxes, and we have. We cut payroll taxes for about 160 million workers. And we could extend that if the President's plan will expand the payroll tax cut passed last year. Another thing is allowing more Americans to refinance their mortgages at today's near 4% interest rates would put nearly $2,000 a year in the family's pocket. But the American Jobs Act, an excellent vehicle for putting Americans back to work, never really had a shot because, as the minority leader in the Senate said, the #1 priority for the Republican caucus was to make President Obama a one-term president. But is it right to make getting rid of Obama your top priority when we have so many Americans out of work and we have an economy that really has never come back? I think that it's not a good thing. And I wish we could move away from that and start focusing on the things that people really, really, really need. You know, the Deal for All, if I could go back to the Deal for All, which is the Progressive Caucus's idea for how we negotiate and what the basic foundation of any deal needs to be, is simple. The way things are shaping up, after all the dust is settled in 2012 election, an average middle-class family could face tax increases of $2,000 unless Congress acts. That's how important it is for us to do something and to act. And this is an opportunity. This fiscal cliff they talk about is an opportunity to address the budget in a responsible way that grows our economy and puts Americans back to work. Talked about the American Jobs Act, other great ideas as well. But too many folks in Washington, too many folks here in the Capitol would rather cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, benefits for millions of Americans that the millions of Americans depend on. And as I said, this particular chart shows it all. When you see the huge numbers of people who rely on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and they rather than getting together and working on the problem, they'd rather cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security benefits and that millions of Americans depend on, and raise taxes on middle-class Americans to protect tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. That's simple as that. So let's just take a look at what's at risk, Mr. Speaker. 1 in every 4 families depends on our Social Security system. 61 million folks, including 36 million retired Americans. It's important for people to remember Social Security also cares for people with disabilities and survivor benefits for people who have parents who pass on. So many children in this country today are surviving on those benefits, which some of us in Congress are trying to protect, others are trying to cut. And nearly every American senior can depend on Medicare to cover health care costs. Turning Medicare into a voucher system, as Republicans have proposed, would not only make seniors pay thousands more for Medicare, about 6,000 more estimated, but leave as many as 65, but leave many 65 and 66-year-olds without any health care coverage at all, which would be a shame. It would return our nation to a time when seniors were in desperate and bad shape. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, the Progressive Caucus is proposing the Deal for All, for common sense proposals that will solve our deficit problems and protect the American middle class. A Deal for All says that any plan cannot slash benefits for millions of American seniors, children, and disabled Americans who depend on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Deal for All says we must make and ask and expect that the wealthiest 2% pay their fair share of taxes and close loopholes that let companies ship jobs overseas. The Deal for All makes smart cuts to defense spending, not just any old cuts, smart cuts, efficient cuts to defense spending to focus our armed forces on combating 21st century risks. And the Deal for All calls for any plan to invest in America's future by putting Americans back to work. Yes, we're facing a fiscal cliff, as some call it, but that doesn't mean the middle class should get pushed over the edge of that cliff. If working and middle class people are going to take a hit in tough times, it shouldn't be to pay for tax breaks for rich folks and millionaires and billionaires and oil companies. It's time for all Americans of every economic situation to step up and do what's right for this country. And it's time we had a deal in Washington that reflects our values. Now, I just want to elaborate on this a little bit by telling you, Mr. Speaker, about how the Progressive Caucus has been bringing experts together to study this issue. This is not just something we thought up. We've brought in experts in the field, economists, people who really focus hard on and have expertise in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, jobs, how to reduce the military budget in a wise way. We've brought folks together to discuss this. In fact, yesterday was one of the hearings that we've had, and the Progressive Caucus was hard at work holding a hearing. We're going to put some of it online so people can see it. And we had these experts from across the political spectrum, some conservatives, to detail the best ways to avoid the fiscal cliff and to rejuvenate the economy without harming essential protections for the middle class. And so the pending fiscal cliff is an enormous opportunity to address our jobs crisis. I say jobs first, Mr. Speaker, and then we need to put our country on the path to fiscal health. The Progressive Caucus is laying the groundwork to make sure that any agreement reflects these core values. And our bipartisan panel yesterday confirmed the best way to grow our economy is from the middle out, not from the top down. No trickle down. We also cannot expect to put Americans back to work unless we protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and ask the wealthiest to contribute their fair share. So we had Larry Korb come in, and he is a person who has an extensive background, very wise gentleman, has politically on the conservative side, but has done a lot of important research on how we can reduce our military footprint in a smart way. Mr. Larry Korb, very well prepared witness, shared his views and was really a big help as he laid out his presentation. And I just want to share with you a little bit about what he had to say, Mr. Speaker, because it really was fascinating. I think that I would urge people to check out Mr. Korb's presentation online. He had a number of things that would really provoke a lot of important thought, and they're online. You can go to the Progressive Caucus website and see some of that. But let me talk a little bit about what he said. Mr. Larry Korb was asked to how best to summarize his take on the current defense budget, and he pointed to our poster, the one, this one right here. And Mr. Korb made himself very clear when he said, don't pay for 20th century military in the 21st century, which I think sums it up. And I'll elaborate more on what he had to say, but we had another expert who I think I'd like to direct people to listen to, Ms. Maya Rockymore. She's the chair of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and she said, quote, changes to programs must be based on what is best for their beneficiaries, not on what is expedient for reducing America's debt, unquote. She also went on to add, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are vital to the economic and health security of millions of senior Americans. Chad Stone was also there, and he talked about the jobs picture, and he actually referenced our poster right here as well. And Chad Stone, he's the chief economist for the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, and he said that piling tax cuts on will only lead to draconian cuts in programs millions of Americans rely on. So we can't go with this cuts-only approach. We got to have some jobs, and we got to have some investment. And Steve Wamhoff from the Center of Tax Justice put it best. He said, quote, I think all of us here agree that the most important job for Congress right now is to help the economy to create jobs. Tax cuts are one of the least effective tools to accomplish this goal. And so we had a great lineup. I urge folks to go on our website, study what they had to say. But I just do want to go back for a moment to just talk a little bit about the ideas Larry Korb shared. And what he said is that we mentioned sequestration. He said that sequestration is certainly not a smart way to cut the defense budget because it's just a across-the-board cut. But close analysis, and careful cuts and strategic ones could help a lot. The fact is, he talked about how the Pentagon actually is pretty well endowed, and he said that he talked about how if the automatic sequestration defense cuts were to go into effect, the fiscal year of 2013, non-war expenditures, a 2013 base, he said the budget will be reduced by about $55 billion down to what is about $500 billion and remain at that level in real terms for quite a while. And he said that this result in total reduction of about $500 billion over a decade from the projected levels in defense spending. And he also went on to note that it also means that the Pentagon will still be spending more in 2013 after sequestration than it did in 2006. So they're not going to be poor by any means. At the height of the Iraq War in 2006, we still would have been spending more than that if sequestration goes into effect. But he's not just saying do sequestration. He's actually promoting a strategic and smart way to do some cuts. But he says that, look, the United States military can do well, defend our nation, and protect our country for about $500 billion. And that seems to make sense to me. We'd still be spending so much more than any other country in the world. He went on to also note that in short, the military really doesn't have a resource problem. They have what they need to defend the country. He noted that if the sequestration goes into effect, it would not be ideal to just do cross-the-board cuts, but there are a number of weapon systems that could be retired, and a number of strategies for reducing the military budget that would not hurt national security, but would really put our country in a position where we are dealing with our financial problems in a forthright way. And I think that it makes sense to really look carefully at these ideas. And, you know, Maya Rockamore, you know, went on to note when she talked about Social Security that it does not contribute to our nation's deficit. If you look at Social Security, it actually runs a surplus. And we don't need to cut Social Security. What we need to do is to recognize that this important program is a program that has been one of the most successful in the history of the United States, and that if we abandon our commitment to our seniors and the disabled, we will be abandoning a core principle of our country. And Mr. Chad Stone was important in his testimony as well, and as we wrapped up, I was most impressed with the idea that it's not just about cuts, we also need to grow our way out of this recession, and that means investing in jobs. And I think the American Jobs Act and many other things would put us a far way down the line if we were to make those proper investments. And so that's what I want to say about the economy tonight. I'd like to urge people, Mr. Speaker, to focus their attention on the so-called fiscal cliff. It is coming up. We will see expiration of the Bush tax cuts. We will see expiration of the payroll tax. We will see expiration of the doc fix. We will see expiration of the A&T. There will be a number of things coming together all at the same time. There will be budgetary negotiations, but no matter what they are, they've got to include protection of our social safety net, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They've got to protect, the military must share in the cuts. The wealthiest Americans must help us get some revenue. And finally, we've got to put jobs up front and center and grow this economy. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm ready to retire, and therefore will yield back.
The gentleman yields back.